I always knew I was the daughter people forgot to count. The one who stayed quiet, cleaned up, made the plans no one showed up for. But that day, sunlight sharp on polished windows of a Los Angeles chapel, guests glittering in clothes that screamed money, I was the one in white. And somehow, I still felt like the help. It should have been the happiest day of my life. That's what people say, don't they? But from the moment I woke up, something in me whispered, this isn't celebration. It's a stage. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe it was the weight of the dress, the weight of years spent trying to matter. But beneath the music, the champagne, the flashes of camera lights, I felt the ground shifting. People think a proposal sets the tone for the marriage. If that's true, I should have known better. He asked me to marry him over cold chicken Alfredo. No eye contact, no ring, just a fork midair and those words, you wanna just get married? It wasn't romantic. Hell, it wasn't even a question. But I nodded. Smiled even. Told myself it was practical, adult. Love isn't a movie, right? I thought maybe it didn't have to feel magical, it just had to be real. My family's reaction? Muted at best. My mom said, well, at least you won't be alone. My sister just blinked, probably doing the math in her head about whether he'd earn more than her husband. No one cried tears of joy. No champagne toasts. Just a quiet nod from Dad like he'd been preparing for this version of me all along, settling. Still, I went ahead with it. Because silence sometimes feels safer than asking, do I deserve more? The wedding began like any other. White flowers. A string quartet. Expensive silence. I walked down the aisle feeling like a ghost in Tool. He barely looked up when I reached him. His hand in mine was cold, fingers stiff like we were business partners closing a deal. His side of the church was filled with people who didn't smile. His best man leaned in, whispered something, and they both smirked. I wanted to ask what was funny, but I didn't. Then came the vows. He mumbled his. I could barely hear. A few people laughed, not loud, just enough to feel like I was the punchline. When it was my turn, I stared at him. This man I was about to bind myself to legally, emotionally, spiritually. And I said the words. Not because I believed them. But because I didn't want to be the girl who called off her wedding in front of everyone. I noticed my dad shifting uncomfortably. My mom looked lost. But no one said a word. They all sat, watched, and let it happen. I smiled through it. That brittle kind of smile women wear when everything's falling apart inside. Told myself, don't ruin this. You're already here. Then came the reception. Glasses clinked. Laughter echoed. And he stood for a toast. Here's to love, he said, lifting his champagne. And a good bet. 15 million says I couldn't get her to say yes. Guess I win. Some people laughed like it was a roast. Others froze. I stared at him. He didn't flinch. Just drank. I looked at my sister, mouth slightly open. My mom's hands trembled in her lap. My dad's face drained of color. I did what I've always done. Smiled. Nodded like it was a joke. Let people believe it was some edgy humor we'd agreed on. But inside? Something cracked. I could feel it, deep and quiet. Later that night, back at the hotel suite, penthouse view, velvet curtains, champagne we never opened, he was on the phone. Laughing with someone. Talking about a game. I sat on the edge of the bed, the lace of my gown scratching my skin. Was that real? I asked. He didn't even look up. What do you think? Then he disappeared into the bathroom. I sat there. Alone. Mascara bleeding into my cheekbones. Staring at the city I was supposed to start a life in, with a man who thought I was a punchline. I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered to myself, "Why did you say yes?" There was no answer. Just silence. I curled up in the corner of the bed. Swallowed the night. Thought maybe I could forget. Then came the knock. Firm. 2 beats. Not a hotel staff kind of knock. I opened the door, still in my dress. A man stood there, dark suit, serious eyes. He flashed a badge. FBI, he said. We need to talk about your husband. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, with a face that didn't blink much. He held up a badge. Real. Heavy. No time for questions. Ma'am, we need to speak. Privately. It's about your husband. You may be in danger. The lace of my gown clung to my arms as I stepped back and let him in. He scanned the room fast, like muscle memory, then closed the door gently behind him. Blaine, if that was still his name, was asleep in the bedroom, snoring lightly, as if our lives hadn't just changed 3 hours ago. The agent moved fast, sat at the desk, opened a black folder. His voice had no room for pleasantries. Is anyone else here? I shook my head. He tapped the folder twice. You think you just married Blaine Croft? He pushed a document across to me. My eyes fell on the picture, my husband in a tux, and the name under it was crossed out. Below it, Dawson Krieg. What is this? I said, my voice half whisper, half laugh. Is this some kind of prank? Blaine Croft doesn't exist, he said flatly. Your husband is in the Federal Witness Protection Program. Or was. Until tonight. I blinked at him. No, that's not possible. He laid out another document, thick black lines crossing out most of the text. But one phrase stood out, Level 2 clearance only. I'd seen those words in spy movies. Never thought they'd end up in my wedding night vocabulary. He's part of a sealed identity case, the agent added. We believe he broke protection protocol. That's why we're here. I just sat. The gown scratched my thighs, my mouth was dry, and suddenly, I could hear every tick of the hotel wall clock. You've married a ghost, ma'am. My thoughts started to scatter. All those times Blaine, Dawson, would change phones and say it was for work. How he locked drawers in his office. How his own mother had barely acknowledged me at the wedding. Last week, I said, more to myself than to him, he got a call. He stepped out and said, You think they'll find out? I thought it was work stuff. I pushed my palms into my eyes, trying to make it make sense. But nothing settled. I should have known, I said, mostly ashamed. I ignored everything. He made me feel like I finally mattered. The agent didn't soften. But he wasn't cruel. He pulled out a card, set it on the table. I need to ask something. Did he ever mention aliases, hidden accounts, offshore anything? I looked at him, still torn between defending Blaine, or whatever his name was, and protecting myself. He made me sign something once, I said slowly. Said it was for taxes. I didn't read it. Just trusted him. Trust is how people like him get what they want, the agent said. I gripped the edge of the desk. Was I a cover story? A safe disguise? Did he even love me, or was I just paperwork? You need to think very carefully, the agent said. Because if this blows up, and you're tied to it, you go down with him. He stood up then, buttoned his jacket like this was just another long day in a job full of secrets. We'll be in touch. Don't confront him. And if he disappears, call. He handed me the card. I stared at it like it might bite me. Then the door clicked shut behind him. I turned back into the room. Blaine lay there, dead asleep, breathing like nothing had changed. My body moved, but I couldn't feel my legs. I just walked. Slid under the blanket beside him. I didn't close my eyes. I couldn't. Who did I marry? I whispered into the dark. Minutes passed. Or hours. I couldn't tell. But I needed more. His phone sat charging on the nightstand. For once, unlocked. I tiptoed into the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and opened it. Most of the texts were boring. Then one popped up from a number I didn't recognize. She took the bait. We move on phase 2 tomorrow. The flight back to Wilmington felt endless, but I couldn't remember a single cloud or stretch of sky through the window. I was sitting there, upright, seatbelt buckled, posture perfect, like a bride should be after her wedding. Except brides aren't supposed to wonder if they just married a stranger with no name. When I walked through our front door, the air felt colder than it ever had. The house, usually silent but familiar, now carried a different kind of quiet. It was the silence of something watching me, waiting for me to realize how deep the cracks already were. I set my small bag down, still wearing the remnants of polished makeup, and kept hearing it, his voice echoing through crystal glasses. I married her on a bet. My mind tried to excuse it, insist it was a joke. But the laughter that followed, that laughter wasn't playful. It was the kind that comes from people in on something you aren't. The house wasn't welcoming me back. It was testing me. I stood in the study, lights off, seeing only the faint glow from downstairs seeping beneath the door. That's when I heard it, the low, mechanical hum from the basement. One of his servers. He always kept those secret, dismissed them as work files. But why would a financial consultant need 3 locked servers humming at midnight? I told myself I'd look tomorrow. But for tonight, I'd sleep. Or try to. My mind didn't listen. I kept seeing the toast. I can still feel the chill in that tent when he rose to speak. Champagne in hand. Eyes scanning the room as if judging odds. Here's to my wife, he'd said, pausing, and the best bet I've ever made. A ripple moved across the room. A pause. Like people weren't sure if they should laugh. Then they decided they should. Some slapped tables. Others covered their mouths but didn't stop smiling. I smiled too. That reflex we women perfect. My father's hand touched my arm, light, asking without words, "Is this what you chose?" My mother looked down at her lap, unreadable. I waited for Blaine to smirk and say it was a joke. He didn't. He clinked glasses with his best man instead. I stood there, nodding, my cheeks aching from performance. And in that moment, clarity pressed against my ribcage. I wasn't a partner. I was a win. Back in Wilmington, the clock on the mantel read 11:57 p.m. when the knock came. 3 measured taps. I froze, unsure if I should pretend not to be home. I opened the door, just a sliver. A woman in a dark blazer. Badge. Lavinia Kroll. "I'm here about your husband, Ms. Weller," she said. I stepped back, letting her in without thinking. She moved with certainty, like someone who didn't knock unless she already knew the answer. She sat. Placed a file on the table between us. You heard something tonight you weren't supposed to hear. I swallowed. So it wasn't a joke. She didn't blink. No. It wasn't. Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was merciless. She opened the file. Photographs. Documents. My husband, Blaine Dawson, standing inside a Chicago bank. A different name under the photo. Why show me this? I asked, feeling the question scrape my throat. Because you're still innocent, she replied. But innocence ends fast in men like him. She slid forward pages, shell companies, offshore accounts, real estate deeds never signed by him but by me. My signature. Perfectly forged. Or willingly given. I pressed my hand to my mouth. What happens now? She stood. You learn everything he taught you not to question. When she left, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat alone in the living room, seeing my silhouette in the window. Not a wife. Not even a victim. A mark. I took a long breath and whispered, "This isn't where it ends." My phone buzzed on the table. A new email notification. I picked it up. Subject, Phase 2, confirmed target located. My eyes burned. Target. That's what I was. I tapped reply. But I didn't type yet. I needed to understand. Not what he'd done, but who he thought I was. When the door closed behind Agent Kroll, I was left with nothing but the quiet drone of the night and the rhythmic tick of a clock on the wall. I opened my laptop in the home office, fingers trembling. The house felt cavernous, emptier than it had ever been when I lived here believing in us. I slid the top drawer open, just like he asked me so many times to sign on company matters, and a photograph fell out. It wasn't carefully hidden. It was placed. It was a marriage license dated 2008, his face printed above another woman's name. I gathered it in my hand as the weight of every joke, every strange glance, every locked drawer, came rushing at me. In that moment it hit me, the toast wasn't casual. On a bet. Code for he already owned me, believed me an easy win. I left the computer on, walked into the living room where Blaine sat, glass in hand, news flickering behind him. My heart beat loud. I sat, placed the photo on the table in front of him. Care to explain this? I said. He turned slowly, his expression hollow. That's old business, nothing your concern. I stayed calm. Your wife in 2008. Your name wasn't Blaine Brinsley then. The TV noise faded. He sighed. You're tired. Let's talk tomorrow. I shook my head. No. Now. I flashed the recording device recorded from his office drawer, secreted because I knew I had to protect myself. His face changed then. You'll regret this. I met his eyes. I already did. Regretting silences. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I found the key scribbled in the birthday gift card he'd given me. It matched the small door beside his study. Behind it, a safe room lined with file boxes and passports. Ledgers labeled Phase 1, Phase 2 detailed offshore transfers, numbers I was never meant to see. I took pictures. I closed the door gently, feeling the truth settle. I now held proof, not just of lies, but of my way out. Later, I sat in my childhood bedroom, where my father had once built his reputation from scratch, sending one line in an email, "I'm in." My mother's voice from the wedding echoed, "Why can't you just be grateful?" So I picked up a photo of him, my dad, after a scam had almost destroyed everything. I promised his memory and my own that I wouldn't become someone else's scheme. I stood up and typed, "Give me 3 hours. I'll have everything ready." Outside, the Wilmington skyline turned rose with sunrise. That light said something, some truths you cannot ignore. My phone buzzed. A screenshot of a transfer, $3 million from his Cayman account, taken last night. Recipient, Vexler Holdings. I locked the screen. My feet met the floor quietly. I walked toward his bedroom door, then paused. I whispered, "You were the bet, and I accepted. But I'm cashing out." I woke to an empty side of the bed. No note, no trace of him, just the indentation where he'd slept. The house felt staged, like a set after the actors had walked off. I walked into the kitchen, reaching for the coffee I'd brewed out of habit, even though I couldn't taste anything anymore. My phone lay on the table, the drafted email to Agent Kroll still unsent. My finger hovered over the screen. I wasn't hesitating out of fear, I was mourning the version of myself who once believed loyalty meant silence. I opened the transfer log again. $3 million, moved overnight. No hesitation on his end. No flinch. I remembered Lavinia's warning, "Every day you wait, he gets further away." I looked around this kitchen, this marriage, this life I'd been convinced to protect. If the trap had been wearing white and smiling at cameras, then my escape would be this, my voice, finally unbound. I pressed send. Barely an hour passed before the doorbell rang. I expected Blaine. It was Lavinia. No greeting. No apology. She pushed a USB into my palm the moment I opened the door. "Either you walk into this voluntarily," she said, eyes steady, "or you become evidence." Inside the USB were photographs, me at a bank desk weeks ago, signing a loan I barely remembered approving. My name printed above legal jargon, attached to shell companies. Me, smiling politely. Me, sinking myself without knowing. "You've been leveraged," she said. "He used your reputation. Clean face. Steady wife." I felt shame rise, hot, but I held her stare. "You think I didn't suspect?" She shook her head. "Suspecting isn't testifying." I asked, "What happens if I don't?" Her answer, "Then you'll fall with him." I replied quietly, "You think I'm scared to stand up there?" She said, "No. I think you're ready." The walk into the FBI office in downtown Wilmington felt like crossing the threshold into another skin. The silence was different here. It wasn't suppressed, it was disciplined. A kind of stillness forged by consequences. They led me to a room, not an interrogation room, but a conference table marked by seriousness. I laid down everything, the photograph from 2008, the recording from the living room, the scanned ledgers from his safe. "This is everything I have," I said. "And I'll testify." They looked surprised, not at the evidence, but at my poise. One agent murmured, "We'll protect you." I shook my head. "I'm not afraid of him. I'm afraid of forgetting who I am." They pushed forward affidavits. I signed them all. Irony wasn't lost on me, that the same hand that had unknowingly built his empire was now dismantling it. I looked up and asked, "When this is over, can I wear red?" They didn't understand it was both joke and vow. Outside the building, the world tried to resume its normal rhythm. That's when I ran into Bethany, an old classmate, cheerful, unscarred. "Tamsin! Married life treating you well?" I managed, colorful. She laughed, then added, I saw Blaine last week, talking to some woman, looked like a banker. They looked serious. I didn't let my expression change, but something in my chest tightened. That wasn't in any file. I hurried home. I tore through his office methodically, scanning every corner, every drawer. That's when I found it, a folded note, scribbled quickly, Cherrywood. 3 p.m., secure. I took a photo, then wiped the security footage from the server he thought only he controlled. By 2:45, I was parked across from Cherrywood Cafe, camera ready on the passenger seat. At 3:07, Blaine walked in. Not hurried. Not nervous. Confident. He wasn't alone. A woman in a gray suit waited at a corner table. He sat, handed her a file. She nodded. Not a lover. A partner. My hands trembled, but my pulse was steady. I recorded everything. I sent one message to Lavinia, phase 2 just started. And I'm watching. What I didn't notice, until I looked up, was the man 2 cars behind me, lifting his phone. Someone else was watching me, too. I got home just before sunset, the light slanting through the living room blinds in thin, golden lines. Everything looked just as I left it. But something was off. The quiet wasn't still, it was too still. The front door, which I always lock, was slightly ajar. My laptop screen glowed from the desk, lid half closed. I hadn't left it open. I walked over, carefully. A notification pulsed on the screen, backup upload complete. I didn't remember setting anything to upload. I checked the folder. The file name matched the recording I took of Blaine at the cafe, except it was half the length and started mid-conversation. A chill crawled up my spine. I called Lavinia. The video's short, she said immediately. It's looped. Looks like a jump cut. She sounded confused. I wasn't. I opened my USB backup. My version, full length, unedited, was intact. Which meant he knew. He knew I was watching. And he'd gotten ahead of me. Not an hour later, a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole, 2 officers. Clean uniforms, polite smiles. One held a folder. Mrs. Weller, we need you to come with us. It's about a complaint filed this evening. The police station's lights felt too bright. Like they were trying to blind me into submission. An officer guided me to a room, cool, gray, bare. They said there was an allegation I'd attempted to blackmail my husband. I almost laughed. They played a video. My heart hammered as my own face filled the screen, me, holding the USB, sitting across from Blaine in our living room. But the audio wasn't real. His voice echoed, clipped and cold, if she doesn't get her money, she'll ruin me. It was a setup. A performance. Blaine had recorded me, then edited himself into the victim role. It explained the strange upload, the laptop being open, the timing. He'd planted the seed long ago. Just in case. I looked straight at the officer. That's fake. We have what we need, he said. I folded my arms. Then I want my lawyer. Not because I was scared. Because I was finished playing his game by his rules. By the time I was released, the sky had gone fully dark. My phone buzzed with a message from Blaine's attorney, suggesting a quiet resolution. I didn't answer. I went straight to the address he listed, a glass office downtown, sterile and expensive. The lawyer greeted me with rehearsed warmth. We sat across from each other under cold lighting. There's a way we can avoid escalation, he said. You sign a statement. Say it was a misunderstanding. This all goes away. That's when it hit me, he wasn't defending Blaine. He was erasing the trail to the FBI. I stood. No deal. Before leaving, I asked to use the restroom. He gestured down the hall. On the way back, I passed the front desk, visitor log open. I snapped a photo. Later, I zoomed in. One name popped, Charles R., Blaine's accountant. Offshore. Quiet. Dangerous. I called Lavinia. I'm done reacting. It's time we go full court press. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with receipts, messages, phone screenshots. Patterns emerged. Every shady transaction had a buffer. A layer. Someone else's name. I remembered Jason, Blaine's college buddy. Quiet genius. Loyal. I texted him under an alias, posing as a startup rep needing video editing support. Jason couldn't resist a brag. Used my Splice timeline tool on a high-profile case last week, he messaged, attached with a screenshot. It was my living room. My USB. His software. You played me, Blaine, I whispered. But now I know the game. Just after midnight, Blaine walked in. Keys jangled, coat dropped, smile lazy. We've had a rough patch, huh? He said, like nothing had happened. Glad we're moving forward. I mirrored his grin. Sure. Let's move forward. In my purse, the unedited video sat beside Jason's confession. Tomorrow, I'd go to the FBI again, but not with just evidence. With leverage. He fell asleep fast. I stayed awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan turning above us. Slowly. Steady. You turned this into a game, I whispered to the dark. Now it's my move. I received the invitation to the gala in a gilded envelope, Blaine's annual night of giving back. He expected I wouldn't show. He underestimated how ready I was. I stood before my closet, glancing at dresses. I chose the black silk, sleek, unfussy, like armor. Lavinia said later it looked funeral ready, and she was right. I rehearsed what I'd say. I studied the guest list. I sent Jason's tech data to the FBI. My mind quiet. I kept repeating, tonight is not about revenge. It's about truth. I walked into the ballroom and felt ready either way. The music flowed, laughter bubbled, chandeliers glowed. Everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. Blaine was across the room, handsome, clean suit, charming as senator, holding his champagne glass like he owned the room. I made my way over to Kim, my bridesmaid years ago, now pulling hors d'oeuvres with a forced smile. I leaned in. You know what he did, don't you? I whispered. Her lips trembled. She didn't answer. Be careful, Tamsin, she said. And in that moment I realized I wasn't being careful anymore. I waited for the highlight, his speech. The lights dimmed. He climbed the stage. I dropped the USB into the events system. The screen behind him flickered. He began, "Thank you all for supporting our cause," the feed broke. Suddenly footage rolled, bank transfers, passports, rental cars in Bangkok. Audio clips of him saying, "I'll rinse the account." Jason's timeline popped up. The audience gasped. Blaine froze. I stepped forward. This man is not just my husband. He is a fraud. Phones lifted. He tried to speak. His voice faltered. Invitation cards spun, crystal glasses tilting. His empire of charm collapsed under its own broadcast. He recoiled. "This is slander," he shouted. "She's unstable." "We're in the middle of a divorce." He produced a printed restraining order. "She broke into my files." The crowd fractured. Some recoiled. Others flicked record. My voice stayed calm. Then why was I never served? A quiet moment passed, then an FBI agent entered from stage left, badge shown, a warrant brandished. Blaine froze. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. "Not today," the agent replied. The audience shifted. The night tilted. In the aftermath, reporters swarmed. Kim found me. She hugged me, tears glistening in her eyes. Lavinia appeared beside me, silent support. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I left the gala by the back exit. No applause. No acknowledgement. Just the crisp night air on my face. I inhaled deeply. "You taught me silence, Blaine," I murmured to the breeze. "Tonight, I used it better than you ever did." I woke up to silence, no buzz, no voices. Just light sneaking in through the curtains and a pit in my stomach. My phone was blinking like it was in distress. Missed calls. 17 of them. News stations. A few lawyers. Unknown numbers. I didn't even have to unlock the screen to know. Lavinia stood in the doorway, holding coffee. She didn't blink. "He's gone." 2 words. That's all it took to tilt the world. Blaine's house, empty. His wardrobe cleared out, laptop gone. His favorite leather duffel missing. But it was the marina call that locked it in, his car abandoned in a long-term lot, key still in the ignition. I checked our bank accounts. At 12:04 a.m., $1.3 million gone. Vanished into an offshore shell. That's when it stopped being about betrayal. It wasn't just a narcissist fleeing shame. He was evading justice. Blaine didn't run. He evaporated. I gathered the files. The drives. Jason's audio logs. I shoved everything into a battered tote and headed to the FBI field office. Agent Rosales met me outside, looking tired but alert. She didn't waste time. "We believe he planned this for months," she said. "Staged chaos to trigger distraction." They questioned me hard, everything from shared assets to hidden aliases. Tax shelters. Flight patterns. I didn't have all the answers. "But I know where he hides things," I told her. "He always said, if something matters, keep it one lock away." I told them about the Capitol Hill storage unit. Rosales hesitated. I pressed. "Let me go. I need to see it for myself." They agreed. Maybe it was the way I said it. Or maybe she saw the fire in my face and knew I wouldn't let it burn out. It was cold inside the storage facility, like stepping into someone else's unfinished secret. The team pried open the door, and what stared back was a hoarder's shrine to duplicity, luxury watches lined up like trophies, stacks of burner phones, neatly labeled passports from countries I'd only read about. I moved past them, toward the locked drawer he once told me was just for nostalgia. Inside were photos, our wedding, birthdays, vacations. But tucked beneath them were newer images. Candid shots of me in the grocery store. At the gym. Someone had been tailing me. I felt something cave in my chest. Not panic. Just a thud of truth. It had always been a game to him. The watches. The lies. Even me. He never loved anyone, I whispered. Not even the money. Just the game. Rosales crouched beside me. You ended it. Let's finish this. Back at the office, they asked me to record a message. A statement. Something public. Something bait-worthy. I sat in front of the camera. No tears. No theatrics. Just my voice, steady. You married me on a dare, I began. But you forgot who I was. I was never your pawn, Blaine. I was the queen you left unguarded. They set the broadcast to air regionally, enough reach to trigger interest, narrow enough to trace. Hours passed. Then a ping. Rosales appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet. He's alive, she said. And he just took the bait. We didn't celebrate. We moved. That night, the FAA alerted a suspicious flight attempt out of Montana. A private plane registered under a shell company. The FBI intercepted it. On board was no Blaine. Just his briefcase, sitting neatly on a leather seat. Inside was a note, scrawled in his familiar, arrogant handwriting, "Catch me if you can, T." I stared at it. Then smiled, sharp and tired. He still thinks this is a game, I said, turning to Rosales. She didn't have to ask. Let's end this. The courtroom was full. Not with people I knew, not with supporters, but with faces watching for a verdict that had taken years to reach. Blaine sat across from me, his suit pressed, his jaw set like stone. But even from where I sat, I could see his left hand trembling. I stood when they called me. The silence felt heavier than the judge's gavel. I didn't cry. I didn't let my voice crack. I told the truth in the plainest words I had. Dates. Documents. How he forged, lied, manipulated. The gallery stayed quiet. No one needed drama. Just facts. My attorney read from the packet of forgeries. When he got to the fifth, Blaine looked down. Not at me. At the floor. It didn't take long. The jury returned, guilty on all counts. I didn't cheer. I didn't even blink. I just exhaled. Outside, the reporters shouted questions. Cameras clicked. But I kept walking. Justice didn't feel like victory. It felt like stillness. Like the wind finally stopped blowing. 3 days later, I pulled into the driveway of the old estate. The grass had grown wild, nearly waist high. Shingles were falling off the back porch. The house looked like it had been holding its breath for years. Lavinia met me there with coffee and a flashlight. We didn't say much. Just opened each door, peeked inside, and made mental notes of what could be saved. Furniture was warped, some water damaged. But the bones of the house were still solid. We found a photo in the attic, me and Mom, standing on the steps out front. I framed it and set it in the kitchen. Lavinia touched my shoulder and said, "You earned this piece." I wanted to believe her. But I still checked each corner of the room like Blaine was hiding in the shadows. The next few weeks blurred into plans, renovation crews, painting swatches, repair quotes. It wasn't about making it beautiful. It was about making it mine again. When I finally sat down to write my first speech for the women's shelter downtown, I had no idea what to say. But once I stood in front of that room, those faces, most of them too tired to fake hope, I spoke from somewhere deeper. He married me on a bet, I said, voice even. But I didn't stay on the table. I walked off with the deck. One woman cried. Another stood and hugged me before I stepped off stage. Some just nodded, and that was enough. A few weeks later, someone invited me to speak on a podcast. I said yes, not for the exposure, but because I wanted to be heard by someone sitting alone, thinking they were crazy for feeling used. It was never about the money, I told the host. It was about reclaiming my name. The day I found out about the last betrayal, I didn't even flinch. My lawyer called during lunch. "We found another document," she said. "A sealed transfer of property, ancestral land in Oregon." I didn't ask questions. I just drove to her office. She slid the papers across the desk. He'd signed my name again. Quietly. Months ago. While smiling at me over breakfast like nothing had changed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I filed a civil suit the next morning and won. The judge was swift. The land was restored to my name. 3 weeks later, I stood on the edge of the Oregon cliffs, wind biting my skin. The land stretched wide, undisturbed, like it had waited for me to return. I whispered, "Not today, Blaine." It didn't feel like closure. Just clarity. Back at the renovated house, I sat on the porch with a blanket draped over my legs. Autumn had settled in. Lavinia handed me a glass of wine. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The mailbox creaked as I opened it. A letter sat inside. Plain envelope. Prison postmarked. His handwriting on the front. I didn't open it. I lit the fire pit and tossed it in. Watched it curl and blacken. Lavinia looked over at me. I said, "Some doors are meant to stay shut." And for the first time in years, I smiled, and meant it.